with twice exceptional students. She's conducted a couple or more webinars already. So some of you have watched her already. I've seen her do the talk. She's done research and conference presentation in an international conference about giftedness, which is our topic for today. So to cut it straight, currently she is teaching in senior high school, college, and MBA. How can you do that? So let's all welcome Ms. Mary Iphigene Daradar.
Hi, thank you, Sir Mark, for that introduction. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'll just share a screen so you can see the slides. Okay, so good morning. As Sir Mark said earlier, this has been postponed several times. Part of it is it's because of me because last year I lost my mom last year, so we had to go through. I was grieving and I couldn't give the talk even if I wanted to. But anyway, so today we'll be talking about asynchronous development, and I called this whole slide presentation or webinar as out of sync, parenting a gifted child with asynchronous development. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Okay. So today, the flow of this webinar will be as follows. I'll just define what asynchronous development is and what giftedness is in context of asynchronous development. I'll talk about the key concepts or the concerns, like what does it mean to have an asynchronously developing child, gifted child, that is. And obviously, if I present you a problem, I'll present you with a solution or some things that you can do to help your gifted child who is developing asynchronously. Now, before I further talk about this, I'll give a fair warning that I live with 3 dogs. You might suddenly hear them or probably see them somewhere. I apologize in advance. Okay, so before we talk about the technical definition, I'd like you to tell you a little bit of my experience and my encounter with gifted children. And it's always an interesting thing encountering or having counseling or just meeting gifted children. So I remember I was giving an assessment to I think he was 5 years old then. He was a 5-year-old boy. This was before this. I think this was really the year before the pandemic. He was probably one of the last few clients I assessed. And he was done with his IQ test. And we were moving towards the achievement test. And in the achievement test, you have that comprehension part, listening comprehension. And so I had to read him this story. And this story was about the lemmings dying. And he was like, teacher, no, don't talk about the lemmings. Don't talk about the lemmings. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear them dying. I don't want to hear them dying. And so I was like, okay, what do you do? This was my first time encountering something like this during assessment. So I decided we skip the story. We move on to the next story. Now, 3, 4, 5 stories down, we were talking now about how the sea or the animals in the sea are dying because of pollution. Again, this is a listening comprehension test. And he was like, I told you, I don't want to hear about these things. And he started crying. And then he ran out of the room and went to his mom and hugged his mom and started just bawling, crying. And the mom tells me he does this often when he sees environmental issues. That's one child. The other child, also very young, lost her grandfather. And obviously, for adults, when we tell children what happened, we would say things like, oh, he's just asleep, he went to heaven. But the girl's like, no, he died. My grandfather died. When she got home, she couldn't sleep. She was anxious. She was just restless and she couldn't deal with it. And her mom tried to comfort her by saying things like, oh, it's going to be okay. This is just one situation. He's in heaven. No. And the child said, no, mom. This means you will die. Dad will die. Everyone I love will die. And I will lose you all. And this is the crux of being a gifted child. A gifted child is so intelligent. It's amazing. I don't even have to do an assessment to meet a gifted child, because if you meet a child that just blows your breath away with their intelligence or their ability to converse, you know they're gifted. But that's the thing. They're a gifted child. With that gift is still their youth. And so those emotions that were coming out, where nothing could comfort them, because unlike other children, you can't trick them to believe that, people are just in heaven, or that this is just a story. No, they register in their minds the reality of the experience. So how do you appease a child who understands what we adults try so much also to comprehend in our own lives and try to figure out? And this is where being out of sync comes into the picture. We can view gifted children in two ways: the external view and an internal view. And the external view is how we all, as spectators sometimes and outsiders, would see it, which is, whoa, this is a very smart child. They can perform so much, they can multiply at such a young age. They understand science. They're so curious, they're very eloquent. They can write stories. They're very artistic. We see them as amazing kids. However, we don't see how they, as children, as gifted children, experience giftedness. Because it's more than just being amazing. It's more than just their extraordinary talents. When they talk about giftedness, when we talk about giftedness, it's what we see. They talk about themselves. It's a completely different experience. So the internal view is the view of the gifted from inside. And that would mean seeing that being gifted means being out of sync. I think Mom Luz actually sent me an article recently, and we've been talking about this, I think, in the New Zealand Giftedness conference she's attending right now. And the term that they're using right now is gifted child-centered for the internal view. But these two views are, I think I picked it up from Dr. Linda Silverman and how she perceives that. So when we talk about being out of sync and unsynchronous, we're not saying, oh, the external view definition is wrong. No, what we're saying is that this is their experience. The external view is our experience of the gifted child. The internal view is their experience, the child's experience of being gifted. And that would mean they experience being out of sync. So what does this mean? Now, there are several definitions of giftedness, but because my focus today is being about out of sync or asynchronous, I'd like to use this definition. And I think a lot of people now in the gifted studies and research are embracing this definition. This is by the Columbus group from Ohio, and they defined, and this is a group of teachers, educators, gifted professionals who define giftedness. Look at the first phrase. Giftedness is asynchronous development. That's internal view. That's seeing exactly how they experience giftedness. And it says, I would like to highlight, those in the underlying things like advanced cognitive abilities, we know that, and heightened intensity. We also know that, we see that, we observe that. If you have children who are gifted, most likely most of you have children who are gifted, you see this. And when you have this too in you, this creates a different inner experience. Something that is very, very different from the experience of typical children. It's not the same. And what's interesting also about this kind of giftedness is that as your IQ scores go higher, the more asynchronous you are. I met children with 150 IQ, and they're like, I don't know, if you have a child like that, it's amazing. Like as an adult, I feel like there's so much pressure to like know a lot of things. But those are the children who are more likely to be asynchronous. The higher the intellectual capacity, the higher the greater the chance of asynchronicity. And because of this, because they develop unevenly, they're more vulnerable. And that's why we need to talk about it more, because yes, it's good to support the gifted. Yes, it's good to sort of, give them all of these opportunities. But we also have to see that their experience of everything is very different. And they're going through something that you might not know, they might not articulate, they might just show in a tantrum. But we need to address, because they're very, very vulnerable because of this asynchronicity. And if you met a gifted child, if you have a gifted child, you know that gifted children are very hard on themselves. No one needs to pressure them. They pressure themselves enough. And they also recognize and they're very self-aware of what they're capable and not capable of. And this makes them more vulnerable. So we want to put our focus on the gifted child in order to understand their experience of giftedness. And when we say giftedness, we want to understand what it means for them to be out of sync. Another way of defining, okay, let's define asynchronous development, because the Columbus gave us, giftedness is asynchronous development. Asynchronous development, put simply, is when your social, emotional, physical, intellectual, and creative aspects develop on different trajectories outside of the norm and at an uneven rate. So there's many things going on there. They're not developing all at the same time. They're developing in different trajectories and at different rates. And basically, it's all aspects of the human being. And maybe to make you understand this better, I borrowed this chart or this diagram from Stephanie Newitt. She writes a blog on giftedness, and I just really liked how she presented it. So this is your typical development. This is your typical child. That ring, that circle at the outside, that's their age. Let's say, they're 8. So they're 8 years old. All the colors are the different aspects of their development. So you have academic, you have motor, academic, verbal, social, special talent, and emotional. And if you notice, they're all within that ring. They're all developing within that ring, which means they're developing evenly according to the child's age. And this is typical development. Okay. That's why when you're in a regular school, you can say this is what a second grader needs to learn. This is what a third grader needs to learn. You could say that because that assumes that the development is all at the same time and the progression is all at the same time. But when you talk about atypical development, take notice. Here's your ring, your chronological age, and you have special talent, academic, verbal, academic, math, really far off outside the ring, developing beyond the child's age. You have social, that's kind of a little bit, above his age, but the motor is below this child's age, and the emotional is way below his age. This is a visual representation of what asynchronous development is. And it's funny because you might think it's, okay, based on the two stories I've said, it's just them trying to process this information. It can be as simple even as their skills, their motor skills. I remember, I just don't recall. I recall the story, but I'm trying to recall who it was and what year it was that I met this person. But I remember there was this girl, I think she was trying to do something. She was conceptualizing something. She had an idea, an art idea. And she was trying to work on it, but she couldn't. And she got really, really frustrated. And the reason why she couldn't do it, because her hands were not, her motor skills, her fine motor skills were not refined yet, or not as developed in order to create what she wanted. And that created so much frustration on her part. And sometimes it's simple as that. Or for example, a student who has so much intelligence and knows exactly the answer, but in school, the teacher asks them to write the answer, and at the same time, it's time limit. In the meantime, her fine motor skills are not yet there. It can write, but not as fast. But the brain already knows the answer. Imagine the frustration. I'm sure you can imagine that frustration because one way or another, we have some form of experience just like that. You know something, you can't say it. But then multiply that by 10 times. And that's how the gifted experience it. And if it's a child, they don't have the language sometimes or the way of communicating what they're going through, even if they experience it almost every day. That's asynchronous development. So now that we understand in some level this definition of asynchronous development, let's talk about the key concepts. When I say key concepts, these are the concerns around asynchronous development, why we need to talk about it, why it's important that we spend time, such as now, to really talk about what is going on with asynchronous development. So I mentioned this already before, but increase asynchrony. So the higher the level of giftedness, the greater the asynchrony. So in the Wechsler IQ test, I'm not quite familiar with the Stanford Binet, but in the Wechsler test, I think 120, I still remember correctly, is considered superior IQ. 130 is considered very superior. And beyond that is just profoundly gifted, just really intelligent kids. So at 120, they will experience asynchrony, not as much, not as uneven. 130, probably you'll see it. I've seen some of those. But the 140 and 150, those really experience asynchrony intensely. Again, the smarter they are, the more asynchronous they are. Okay. Unfortunately, it doesn't even out, which leads me to the second key point, key concept. It is progressive. What do I mean by that? Let's say your child is 5 years old and his intelligence is 15. By the time he is 10, his intelligence, let's say his intelligence will be at 20 and his other factors will be the same thing. So whatever that unevenness is, that will progress through development. It never evens out. They will be forever asynchronous. What's interesting to me though, when I was looking into this, when I was restudying asynchrony, I was surprised by this because I used to think that they'd even out somehow. I really they don't. It's just that the child must learn how to manage that, how to manage that asynchrony, that unevenness. So as your child progresses, the discrepancy progresses with your child. As anxiety. The hardest part, I think, about gifted children, in my experience of counseling them, is that they're very much self-aware. So sooner or later, they will be aware that they have an area that is out of sync. And this may lead to some form of fear, anxiety, and depression. Let me tell you a story of there was this student, this young girl. She's very intelligent. Parents are very proud and very supportive. She's the only child, and her teachers are praising her. But every time it's math, when they have to do math in class or do math at home, the math assignment, she would throw a tantrum. She would say, I'm bored, I don't like that, I already know it. And then she throws a tantrum and she just hates math. She really hates math. Weirdly, the parents got a letter from the teacher inviting their daughter to join the math quiz bee. So it's like kind of like mixed messages there. But when we were discussing it and with the parents, and I met the child and we did an assessment. That's why they had an assessment. We realized that the child was not the best in math at her level. All her other areas were, let's say all of their others are 100. Her math was a 90, and she felt it. And she felt that there was something wrong with her. And she can't compete because she's not going to be number one. And that's why there's so much anxiety over even the idea of joining a contest. She refuses, like vehemently refuses to do that. And that's also typical. Or there is, for example, a child who refuses to take tests. Very intelligent, high IQ, refuses to take a test. There was even one encounter, this particular boy, I'm trying to recall, he was already in high school, I think in Ateneo, and he was suffering. He couldn't, there was something wrong. He wasn't fitting in school. He was struggling. So they had him assessed, and his IQ is high. He's considered already gifted. But he had poor social skills. He couldn't deal with pressure. And so he had anxiety. He attempted to suicide. Again, it wasn't really a big deal because he really just drank cherry fur. So he just drank 2 bottles of cherry fur, but it was there. And that's it. And those are manifestations of it. There are different ways. And I think, if I list down all of the, counseling gifted children, most of them are highly asynchronous because they have to deal with these things. There's so much fear and depression and anxiety over it. And this is coupled by the fact that they are perfectionists. Gifted children expect from themselves that they are perfect. I had one client, counseling client, female. She was grade 8. She begged her mom to take her out of her Chinese school and just be homeschooled. And the reason was because she felt pressured, and she said, "Feel like I'm a failure. I'm not going to meet the Chinese school standards." Because if you're familiar with traditional Chinese standards, they tend to teach their students higher level, like even the maths are higher level. And she was adamant about it, and she didn't want. So the mom gave in. They went to homeschool, and because I was curious in our counseling sessions, I started asking about it and the whole thing. And even the parents, when I spoke to them, so they were telling me, like, Miss Mary, we weren't really pressuring her, and she was getting good grades naman. She was not failing. But to her, it was a failure because she was not perfect. So she experienced so much frustration, so she didn't want to do. And here's the clincher. I asked her, why are you so pressured to get all of these perfect stars? She was like, oh, my resume should look good when I enter college. She's grade 8. And she was worrying about maybe she won't be able to enter an Ivy League if she had grades like that. And she had to have good foundations when she starts working because she has to, again, she was thinking about these things. This particular girl is twice exceptional. She's diagnosed with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, which is a very, very brilliant kid. So again, perfectionism and anxiety go together because there's so much pressure internally to deal with their giftedness. And yet most of these gifted kids do not have the tools necessarily to handle this pressure. And they might act out. You might see them acting out. They might start refusing to go to school. And these are all manifestations of their perfectionism and their anxiety. Okay. Imagine knowing you're smart and you're really intelligent and that you're a master in anything. And then realizing there's one thing you can't master. That's hard. And then imagine feeling that and you're just 5 years old, 6 years old. Difficult. I mean, I refuse to go back and reminisce about my teenage years exactly because of the anxiety that I had to go through. Imagine that. Fears. The greatest challenge for gifted, and I hear parents sometimes tell me, Miss Mary, walang friends yung anak ko. Or parang, ayaw niya sa classmates niya. Okay. And or sabihin, like, they like hanging out with adults. I'm concerned about that. Ayaw niya mag-friends with children her age or his age. But again, if you have a gifted child, that's normal. That's typical of them. Because gifted children, if they play with younger kids, their interests are different. Can you imagine? You're grade one, you know, grade one, and they're all playing, and your gifted child has read, let's say, Harry Potter, and he wants to talk about Harry Potter. So grade one, classmate, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna happen. Or they want to sort of talk about the latest research about rocks or about the different layers of the earth. Again, grade one classmate might not be interested. But at the same time, they start talking about this with their adults at home. And then they suddenly want to run around and do crazy things. And the adult is like, I can't do that. The discrepancy there. So peers, when it comes to peers, gifted children need a mix of that. And I'll talk about this further later on in the next part of this presentation. But definitely, with gifted children, the kinds of peers that they have, it must be as varied and in some ways as asynchronous as their development. Acceleration is a good thing, but I don't know, I can be stand corrected, but the last time I heard about acceleration, this was removed by DepEd and don't know if it's back. I don't know if it's allowed again. But actually, for the gifted child, this is the best route, acceleration. And what they found in research is that if a child is accelerated, those immature behaviors sometimes that you would notice in your child, and I quote the immature, disappear when they are with the right group, the right environment. According to the research, is that majority of these gifted children who act out or who are immature, especially among their age mates, are actually just really trying to fit in because they're smart and they're intelligent and they're gifted. In the meantime, they're with younger kids and they see that younger kids cry or throw a tantrum, they normally copy. So it's a coping to fit into the environment. So that's why acceleration is a good thing in general, okay, but always approached with caution. Again, I don't know in the Philippines if we can do this already. We'll see, but again, it's a good thing. These are my last two on the key concepts. Twice exceptionalities or 2E. These are the most asynchronous gifted learners there are. When we say exceptionalities, that would mean they have another disability. For example, they're gifted, but they're ASD, or they have autism spectrum disorder. They're gifted, but they have ADHD. They're gifted, but they have learning disabilities like dyslexia. Okay. So these are twice exceptionalities. And I've met all sorts of twice exceptionalities. I met a gifted child who's autistic, who has autism spectrum disorder. I've met a child who has ADHD, gifted child has ADHD. I've met a child who refuses to talk but is gifted, or a child who has dyslexia or some kind of graphology problem. Okay, so they're the most asynchronous because they're also challenged by something else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not gifted. Some people might think that they're not, but they are actually. As like I mentioned earlier, that girl, she has ASD. She got through all the therapy growing up, but when you talk to her, I sometimes forget I'm talking to a grade 8 student. She sounded so mature and she understood things that adults understood and most people her age wouldn't. So Last is age appropriate expectations. And this is important. I think not just for synchronous development, but particularly just for giftedness. Gifted children are children. I remember I had an encounter wherein the parent was really selling to me the child. Sometimes this happens. Okay. And um, they were telling me that the child is very um, mature, but they seem to do this and do that, and they don't understand and why like that. And I'm like, still a child. They're still a child. No matter how they seem mature to you, they are still children. And sometimes, and this is some of the things, this is one of the nice things I learned from gifted children when they really open up and they talk to you. And I remember one gifted child saying that, like, they like reading as much as they like playing. They like math, science, and all of that as much as they like just being silly. And that's the thing. So even if they are gifted, even if they have so much to offer us, have age appropriate expectations. They're still 5, they're still 7, they're still 10, they're still 11. And when they become teenagers, they'll be teenagers. And that's how we are supposed to see them. Okay. So what do we do? What do we do now that we know all of these things? Okay. I'm sure I did not cover every single thing there is, but if you have questions about it, go ahead and ask later on. But I try to summarize everything here. So how do we support and help our gifted child who's developing asynchronously? Okay. So first, obviously, I'm just going to match it up with everything that I talked about earlier. How do we reduce anxiety? Structure and routine. Structure and routine is certainty. It's predictable. And having that kind of structure is comforting. There's some comfort there. The structure doesn't have to be very strict, like very, but it can be, but it should be there. Like, for example, after dinner, she or he can read a book. Or before dinner, like when they go home, they can rest and then they study. It should be that way. There should be a routine because that's soothing, very soothing, and that could reduce anxiety. Okay. 2 is maybe expose them to relaxation techniques and meditation. Or I know some kids are into yoga. If they're not, then just simple relaxation acts like lying down and being still, breathing. These things. Why? Not because they're anxious at the moment, but this can be things you include in the routine, something you can do as a family, and it is something that they can learn as a skill to cope with anxiety. Okay. Third is to teach them mindfulness. And I'm sure you've heard about this, and it is a very, very effective tool. Research has found that people who practice mindfulness and meditation have better, healthier brains and calmer brains and calmer lives. So focus on the present. And my favorite thing to teach anyone who's starting learning mindfulness is to chew their food slowly and count how many times they chew it, or to taste the food, not to rush eating, because rush eating means that you're not being mindful of what you're eating. So you're chewing. So that's something you can do. Why? Because again, anxiety is caused by worrying about the future and about the past. We reduce anxiety by focusing on the present. So by practicing mindfulness and just putting that somewhere here and there, like brushing their teeth and counting how many minutes they're brushing their teeth, like 10 in front, 10 at the back, on the side, just counting those things. Those are mindfulness exercises. They seem like, they're not important and they're kind of like stupid exercises, but they're actually focusing the child in the here and now, because gifted children worry so much about the future, about their future, about the world, and sometimes it's just overwhelming. So they need to sort of focus on the now. Number 4, sorry for the typographical error there, provide opportunities to express their feelings. And gifted children, at the moment that they experience it, might experience complicated feelings. I was reading one article by Dr. Silverman, and in one of her stories, she was talking about this boy who, punched another kid. This gifted boy punched another kid. And the mom was called into the principal's office, and the mom was like, what did you do? And she's like, why did you punch? I taught you not to be violent, blah, blah, blah. But mom, you don't understand. You don't understand. And she was trying to express he was trying to express what happened, but, the mom couldn't understand. So after everything, the boy wrote what happened. And turned out the boy was talking about last year, this is what happened. It was a build up towards this. That's how he understood there was a friendship issue going on with them. And that was the last straw. But if you ask the other boy who was typical development, not gifted, the other boy, like, he punched me. That's all. But it's a more complex thing for a gifted child. So I put their worry jar. Like, have a jar at home. This is a suggestion. A worry jar. And the gifted child can put their worries there. Put it in a piece of paper and then put it in the jar. And that means the worries are no longer with them. They're giving it to that jar. And this is really good to deal with anxiety. I remember Mom Luz taught me this, and she would ask children, it's not a worry jar, but put it in paper, what they're feeling, and then to crumple it, and then to throw it. That's another option, another option of dealing with that. In that way, they're external. In psychology, we call that externalizing the feeling. When you externalize a feeling, it's no longer in you, it's outside, so you're not carrying it around. So this is a good exercise for children so that it can reduce their anxiety. Maybe not just for gifted children or asynchronous, for your other children as well. Second, easing perfectionism. So I'm not saying removing it, because you can't. To be honest, you can't remove perfectionism from a gifted child, but you can ease it. So help your child understand the meaning of being gifted and the challenges that accompany it, to identify their own strengths and weaknesses. I think it's important for children to really name their asynchronicity and to process that. So it could be as simple as, like, talking about, for example, like, yourselves, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and what you're good at and not, and making that seem like it's normal to be good and to be not so good in some things. And try for them to understand that, because gifted children think that they have to be good at everything. So, or asking them, having conversations, like, for example, talking about your own challenges and talking about their siblings' challenges, and them also talking about their challenges and not being ashamed of those challenges. Okay. That is a good exercise of seeing that it's okay to be imperfect. Next is determine realistic expectations, which means that they have to know that they will encounter something that is difficult for them to understand. That even if it's easy for them now, there are ideas and concepts that might be difficult for them. I say here, gifted children are not exempted from working hard. Why? Because I always tell this, this is my advice to all parents who newly discovered gifted children. I always say that make your child study. Even if your gifted child can understand math at the blink of an eye, understand a book, blink of an eye, it doesn't mean they're exempted from studying or putting effort or putting some time to do it. They're not supposed to be cramming the assignment a day before just because they can. They have to learn the concept of hard work. Why? Because yes, they are gifted, but there's always somebody smarter than them still. Better at them. Somebody has more experience, much more exposure. It's not just about knowing. So before they even feel the frustration, it's important that they know that this is part of it, that hard work is part of life. Putting effort is part of life, and that is normal. And they too can do that. And that will ease some level of perfectionism as well. And obviously, I repeat, the focus on the present, because focusing on the present makes them worry less about the future, which is why they're trying to be perfect. As I mentioned earlier, they're worried about their college, they're worried about their high school, they're worried about their work, and all of their dreams. And sometimes that's too much worry for a child to have. So make them focus on the present. Again, mindfulness exercises matter here. Building friendships. So this is with the peers. Okay, there are two things that we can focus on when we talk about building relationships: socialization and social development. There's a long definition on the screen, but let me just shorten it. When we talk about socialization, it's about fitting in, conformity. It's fitting in on what we're supposed to do and what behaviors we're supposed to have given the group that we're in. Okay. That's not important for the gifted child. There's a lot of pressure sometimes for the gifted child to fit in and be like other kids, but they're not. Social development is more important. It's a broader concept. It's about being able to have acceptable behavior, but concern for humanity. So it's not necessarily they have to conform with their classmates, but just that they understand their classmates, that they understand their classmates are not as smart as them, to be friends with different sorts of people. Okay. Those who are like them and not like them. It's about having a relationship that can be rewarding. And it's not about necessarily having a lot of friends or being accepted by the whole group, but having a few who understand them, gifted or not. And that's the focus. And that should be the focus for gifted children, specifically those who have asynchronous development. It's not about conforming. And a lot of gifted kids are unique and different. And sometimes they try so hard to conform just because we force them to conform, because we think that's what socializing is. It's not. Socializing is being able to deal with other people and acting appropriately and, appreciating each other. So it's also important to provide opportunities for them to interact with all types of people, and specifically those who are of the same age as them, and also those who have the same mental age. So gifted children have to have different age groups in terms of socialization. So they might have their classmates for their chronological age or like-minded age peers, the ones who like to play and run around and all of that. But they also need friends who can converse with them about things. And I would really suggest this because one of the gifted children I handled, she was going to Discord. I hope you're familiar with Discord. Discord is like the chat group, like a server. We create servers and you meet other people with some similar interests. And she would go there and just try to look for adults to talk to about the things she loved, specifically writing and having people edit her writing. And there was one time it was a scare because she was talking about this Russian guy he was talking to who was working and all of this. And I was like really worried about it, that I had to tell the parents to screen that. So you want to be able to also manage that. Don't let them go into the internet as young kids looking for adult friends or similar mental age friends. Look for people who can be that to them, mentors, coaches, people they can talk to, something like a social group that you can monitor as well while they're there. Do not prevent them from building friendship with older kids or adults, but supervise it, obviously, because when you're dealing kids, you still need to supervise that. But like if they can make friends with high school students, why not? People they can converse with, or in activities that there's a mixed bag of ages, and that would be good for them. Acceleration, it is ideal but not available in the Philippines, as I've said earlier. So if it's not available, what do you do? Okay. Enroll them in gifted programs. Enroll them in enhancement programs. Programs that will give them that challenge that is not inside the classroom. Allow them to do self-directed learning. Like, for example, just facilitate what are the topics they're interested in, what they want. For example, they're interested in wars. Okay, because in my mind right now, it's Ukraine and Russia. So and then let them do the research. Let them see what they want kind of project out of it. And maybe tell them like what they can do to help wars. So from the knowledge to application. But they direct it. They decide on the topic. They do this research on their own. You just assist them. And that also allows that sort of another level of learning. Because I'd like to note here, and I said this, and this is seen in all of the research, being accelerated doesn't mean challenge. Just because you're a 5-year-old or a grade 1, supposedly a grade 1 student, let's say, who's been accelerated to grade 3, doesn't mean you're not going to be bored. Learning higher math doesn't address the problem of the gifted child. The gifted child doesn't necessarily want greater learning because once they learn the foundation, they get it. They don't need higher computations or more science. What you need to bring to them is higher levels of thinking. So no, if we look at, we're not talking about anymore explaining, identifying. We're talking about critical thinking, problem solving, solving world problems, looking at situations, looking at the good and the bad of things. So it's not just about more topics or heavier topics. It's about challenging the thinking. And that's a gifted child. A gifted child gets bored not because of the topic. A, a gifted child gets bored because they're not thinking. You can increase the topic, but still not engage them in their thoughts. So keep that in mind. Also, when you're discussing this with your teachers. Okay. The twice exceptional, as I've said, is the most out of sync child. So the first thing to do is to assess their exceptionalities. What is it? What is their learning disability? Or what is this? Do they have ASD? Do they have ADHD? If you notice your gifted child, is it there's something that's off? You just feel it. And I think parents just feel it. Don't deny. Have the child assessed. It's for their best interest that they are assessed. Because once they're assessed, then you know what kinds of therapies and support you're supposed to give, because it will be different. An ADHD child will get a different sort of therapy. A child with ASD will get a different sort of therapy. And somebody who has a learning disability will get a different sort of therapy. Okay. And continue with that until they graduate from it, until the therapist tells you, okay, your child knows all the skills and we can move forward from here. Focus on their strengths. They might not be good at math. They might not be good at reading. They might be challenged by reading because they're dyslexic. So focus on their strength, which means coordinate with the school that to modify how they demonstrate their knowledge. Because modification is key, specifically for the twice exceptional, the level modification is key, because it's not that they don't know. It's just that the tools that you're using for them to express their learning doesn't suit them. Okay. And lastly, accept the child. And I'm pretty sure none of you experienced this, but this is a case where the biggest case or the biggest problem with twice exceptionalities. Because some parents feel that their gifted child is broken just because they have ASD or because they have ADHD or learning disability. The fact of the matter is that they're not. They're not broken. That's who they are. Again, asynchronous development. That's what it means to be gifted. Age-appropriate expectations. Gifted children are still children, and I've said this before. Provide them with the stimulation they need to hone their giftedness, but expect that they will still act like a kid. So if your gifted child acts like a kid, sometimes it's surprising because yesterday you were having a big conversation about all of the issues in the world, and then following day they're crying like babies, and you're like, what's happening? But they're still kids. They really are still kids, and they still want to act like kids. And they'll tell you, if some parents would ask me, how do I know if I'm doing the right thing for my kid? Ask your kid. Your gifted kid will tell you. You can even ask them what they want or how they want it. Even in their routine and structure that I mentioned earlier, let them be part of the planning and the discussion. Because they know how and they know what works for them. After all, if we're not gifted parents, we do not know what the inner world of a gifted child is like. Other ways to support, so I'm leading towards the end, definitely counseling or therapy. Asynchronous development is difficult. And it's emotional, there's emotional content to it, anxiety, fear, dealing with their perfectionism. Some form of counseling or therapy is great. It doesn't have to be like every week. Sometimes it just has to be, once a month, just to sort of sort through that. I have a few gifted children who have met who would just ask their parents to have counseling with me so that they can talk to someone. So just because they can't talk to their parents, but they want to talk to someone who can understand it. So they ask for counseling and things like that. Definitely model positive thinking. You too have to model everything that I just said. You can't expect your gifted child to do it if it's not also in your household. It has to be consistent, because how will they learn it if not from their parents and from their family? Bibliotherapy, this is very common for gifted children as a therapy. Like offering picture books that are about being different, about uneven development. I put here this website. This is actually, I used to be part of it. I was a co-founder of this, but it's my professor, my former professor runs it. And she's focused on giftedness, and she did a lot of research on picture books that address social emotional awareness. And it's really, and she's passionate about it. And she's very passionate about helping children process their emotions. So there's self-awareness, there are different topics, and she has a whole list in library, and she did a big research on this. It was funded. So it's in our website. If you look at gatheringbooks.org under an SEL library, if I'm not mistaken, you have a whole list of books there. So you can use that as reference for children. I myself collect picture books that sort of talk about depression for kids, that talk about being different and all of that. It might help. Community service is also good because it allows them to not just meet other people, but to also help contribute to solving problems that they feel are in the world, and makes them more present in the world and brings meaning to their lives. And I think it's a nice thing to expose gifted children to this. And last, this is for you guys, is to connect with other parents. A lot of people think that the only kinds of parents who need support are the parents who have to deal with ASD, ADHD, all of these learning disabilities. But actually, parents who are raising gifted kids need support because you need to exchange notes. What worked with who, what worked with what. Because, for example, this talk is not going to give you everything. I'm not going to give you everything. And it also really is great to be able to exchange notes with parents who have a child who's gifted as well. Because I'm pretty sure there are people there who raise gifted children and have notes on it. So connect with other parents. Oh, okay. So this is the website. Can you see it? Okay. So if you scroll down, these are the um, topics. So if you click self-awareness, okay, there is a whole bunch of titles. This list has been published in Singapore libraries since, like, she's now, well, she used to be based in Singapore. My professor used to be based in Singapore. Now she's based in the UAE. Okay. So there are books here that talk about emotions, about feelings, about, and all those things. And they're picture books. And she did this all over the world because she has access to it, because she was given a grant for it. Okay. So lastly, last two slides. If there's one big advice that I would give for any parent who has a gifted child, is to acquaint yourself with your child's asynchrony, because it's very different from one another. If you can create a map of which areas they seem to be strong at and have difficulties, then you can sort of have an idea of how to help your child. Is it in the academics? Is it in emotions? Is it in socialization? And then you can help them, because no two gifted children are the same. So these things I gave you are general, but your child's asynchrony is unique from what, unique. So to help your child better is to get to know their unique development and discover this with them. Talking about the strengths and weaknesses and what the things they like and love, what are the things that are challenging for them. Here you can discover more what their asynchrony is. And maybe to end just this presentation, I'd like to end here. Gifted children are not better nor faster than others, nor do they necessarily excel in the usual considered areas. They're basically different from other children. They're not smarter than typical children. They're not faster than typical children. They're just different. They really are. Because smarter can be, you got a 75, I got an 80, and the other person got a 90. That's smarter. But gifted children, they're built differently. And so we have to address that difference. Those are the references. And thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Mary. That was very, very fruitful. I've learned a lot. Thank you. I've seen a lot of kids same as how you're describing them. So yeah, I can relate a lot to the things that you've said. So now I've got, I think, a couple or three questions in hand. So I'm gonna present it to you. I'm gonna tell you in order, and then you can address them one by one. Yeah.
Sure.
All right. I have. No, actually, I only got a couple. We've got a comment from Miss Bailey Kelly that his boy can relate to a sad story at age 2, crying for a dog that died in the story. So yeah, that was a comment. So I mean, do you wanna comment on that, Miss Mary?
Yeah, I think that's what I exactly mentioned. There are a lot of gifted children who feel deeply, but they cannot be comforted by the usual comfort that we give them. They're not. So you have to tell them the truth. They can face, slowly. Don't screen them. You know how we screen other children? Like we don't even talk about death with kids, gifted kids, because they feel it deeply. They understand it. That's why they can feel it, because they understand it. So try to give them the truth, but at the same time try to soothe them with it. And that's it's the most interesting thing about gifted children. They're so in touch with what the world is, what's happening in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay. The first question is from Mary Ruth Aloba. My 10-year-old has been aware that she is different. She always mentions that she just wants to blend with the rest of her classmates. But peers and teachers would always notice her capabilities and assign tasks to her because she's very reliable and exhibits leadership traits. What can be done about this kind of frustration, and how can we transform this kind of awareness into something that she can appreciate about herself?
Okay. Number one, if she is gifted girls, and the research is consistent, gifted girls tend to prefer to fit in than to stand out. Okay. I think it is important that she not be always singled out. And I think this is something that you have to work out with the teachers also, because it might be possible that every single project, she's the leader. Every single activity, she's the leader. She's getting too much attention. And I'll tell you a story. I had a client who, she was accelerated to grade 6. She was grade 3. She was accelerated to grade 6. And her parents noticed that she was not passing. She was not performing in the level that they're used to. And she went to counseling. And the first question she asked me was this: is it wrong for someone my age to be in that level? So they're aware of that difference. And with girls, they want to fit in. So there should be a balance. Yes, she's very reliable, but she also needs, the teachers also have to give other kids opportunities to learn how to be reliable and give her the opportunity to be a child, to not be always the leader. And so maybe that could be one thing. Second is for her, maybe to look at what is the positive. Why, maybe list out, why do you think you're being seen as reliable? And then she says, so I'm different. What makes you different in these things? How can this difference help your classmates? How can this difference be helping your teacher? So it's also going beyond themselves and seeing the meaning of it. That's why community service is also important, because now they realize that yes, they're being reliable, but they're actually contributing and helping. Okay. And so it's going beyond themselves and seeing beyond themselves on that thing. But also, I think it's also important that we give her a rest, really, from that. Because this is what I wasn't able to talk about this, but this is also consistent among the research and the articles that you'll be reading if you search online about giftedness, is that gifted children don't actually necessarily like to be leaders and to be recognized for being better or different. They just want to be themselves. So sometimes, for example, for her, maybe being themselves is just like, okay, I just want to hang out with my classmates. And also see, does she socialize with her friends? Does she have time to socialize and just hang out and not be always the leader? Because the problem is, you're always the leader, you're not seen as a friend or an age mate. And for gifted children, specifically females, socialization and fitting in is very important. It really is. Unlike sa boys, iba yung boys. Yung boys okay lang. They don't care. But with girls, a lot of the girls who go to counseling, the problem is fitting in. I had one girl, she got into QSI, she was crying to me because she doesn't fit in and the boys don't like her and all of that. And that's her concern. That's not pakialam sa academics niya. So you have to sort of understand that that's a unique thing about gifted girls.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, my next question from Julie Pearl Parlade. I'm sorry, Julie. You typed here. My son is years old. Can you clarify how old is your son? Okay, I'll continue. You can type it in. My son is has always been vocal about not wanting to go to school. He wants to have lessons at home now. He is very good socially, but there are lots of personalities that he will encounter in school, and I think it is necessary. How can we make sure that he learns to deal with different people even while homeschooling?
Okay. Gifted children, when they say they don't want something, you have to investigate.
5 years old.
Okay. Okay. You always have to investigate why. It's possible that the teachers are not treating him well because they can't say it. They can't articulate it. I've seen so many kids, gifted kids, act up. And you're asking, why are they acting up? You're saying like she's very sociable, but suddenly doesn't want to go to school. He wants to be homeschooled. There's something going on. Please investigate what it is. It might be one negative experience in the classroom. And remember, gifted children analyze a negative experience differently from the typical kids. So they might have seen or experienced something and they find it offensive. They find the teacher offensive, rude, not too smart. That happens also. And that's why they're resisting it. Okay, so investigate. This is for everybody. If your child suddenly says that they don't know something. Okay. You might want to you might want to check on what's going on. How can you make sure he learns to deal with different people? If he's homeschooling now, if he's already homeschooling, then extracurricular. It's always that enhancement programs. There are mentorship programs. I know some kids who get into robotics and things like that. That still allows socialization, and it's nice to have those groups. So normally, for children who are homeschooled, for gifted children homeschooled, how would I put it? What helps in addition to that would always be looking at their interests and finding groups that they can learn. It's also better if it's a mixed group. When I say mixed group, mixed ages, not just like, for example, this is for 5 years old. If they can have 6 or 7, if they're older kids in the activity, that's better because they get to meet again ideal age peers as well as mental age peers. I hope that answers the question.
Miss Mary, I think the next question is related to that. From
Okay.
Liv L. Are there any support programs for gifted children who are in the marginalized sector? Could you share some of these programs?
When you say marginalized sector, there are, how do I say this? There are actually very minimal support that's given to the gifted children. This is actually a concern we've had. I've been with Headway for quite some time already. I started as an OJT there in Headway, but it's been a problem right now because budgets for giftedness, for special ed has been, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but special education has been removed as a different sector in DepEd already. So that means something in terms of budgets. But I know that there are city-based programs. Not all cities have it. You just have to check if they have like SPED. SPED, don't be offended when you see SPED because gifted is also part of SPED. Because special education means that it's education that's not for the typical. So giftedness is not typical. So there is that. There are very few programs in the Philippines that is catered to giftedness. For specifically the marginalized. And I don't know if there is right now. Wala talaga. I'm sorry to say this, but wala talaga. Wala talaga siyang specific na program. So I would say, okay, how can you help the marginalized sector who are gifted kids? One is that's why you have science high schools, but it's only for high school, I know, but the science high schools are really designed to do that. Second is that, remember, gifted children don't have to be with fellow gifted children. They just have to be with children or other people of different age who can expose them to the same interest. So I would just suggest that you go whatever programs that is available in and offered by the government for that. But there are no dedicated programs for the gifted. Even all over the world, this is an issue for gifted children. Do you know that they're often neglected kasi nga ang tingin sa kanila matalino lang. So they're neglected group. So special ed group, sila yung pinaka-neglected, gifted. So
okay. Thank you, Ms. Mary. There's a follow-up from Julie. My son likes reading. I know also that it's okay to reread books, but will it not stunt his learning if he keeps reading the same books? So there are books that he can already recite verbatim. Books are expensive kasi although we buy secondhand naman, ebooks are not an option because of his vision problem.
Okay. Okay. So is it okay for him to reread? Yeah. It's, you know, rereading doesn't necessarily mean reading the book the same way. Rereading could mean exploring the other things that you've missed out. Sometimes even I would suggest not just reading the words, but looking at the pictures and just looking at what's happening there. One of my favorite things about I like non picture books without words, like just images that tell a story. And I like that because what I do, and I would suggest is that if you can get your children this, they create their story. So at each page, so that every time they reread, it's not just about rereading the words. It can be exploration of different imaginations. So I collect books like that, and I would ask, I would sometimes bring that in counseling, and I ask children to sort of like tell me a story based on the pages that you've read, and they might tell a story now. This story, tomorrow, a different story. So they can do that. Things, or for example, extend it. Like for example, what could be an alternative ending to this book that you reread? It's same material, doesn't start it. Remember what I'm saying about gifted kids. Gifted kids is not about being faster, better, smarter, or being able to read good or memorize the book. It's about thinking, cognitive thinking and abstract thinking and critical thinking and all of that. So ask them, what's an alternative story here? If we could add a character, what character can we add in this story? And that makes it more creative, and you don't have to buy 10,000 books. And because picture books, especially the new ones, are expensive, really expensive now. I hope that helps.
And Miss Mary, just to add up, parang I've experienced the same thing with some of the kids that we've been handling. Na you'll be surprised, the more they get exposed to different scenarios and situations, the better the story becomes. The more they retell the story, it expands more and more. The language as has been building up as well. So yeah, it's a very interesting suggestion that you gave. Using those picture books without the words. That's a really nice one. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Julie. So next, I have from Kate Galera. Hi, Miss Mary. How do you engage a gifted child to converse more often?
This is challenging, though, kasi some gifted children, they find people annoying. But I think maybe do something together. Like for example, read the same book or explore the same topic, and then just talk about that first. Maybe engaging them in conversing first about the things that they enjoy and they're willing to talk about, or ask them, can you teach me this? So you're not forcing a kind of conversation that you want, like how are you, what are you doing, and all of that. No, you're like, oh, what's this, or kuya ate, what is this? And then ask them to talk about it and see their passion and ask questions, and do that more as an exercise of you two being comfortable and talking. In that way, you induce them to talk, but they don't feel the pressure to say what they need to say or what they have to say. So I think that's a good sort of way to converse. Like ask them, can you teach me this? Oh, I see you're reading about this. Can you tell me about it? Even if you're not really interested about it, but you're interested in the child. So learn what they love. Ask them to talk about it. And I'm sure they'll be glad to talk about it and ask real questions about it. Like, for example, I remember, this is why I have some gifted kids who still talk to me now. Sometimes they message me, sometimes in emails. Because they, like, for example, they just ask me things like, oh, they talk about to me about rocks and all these kinds of rocks. And I will ask, yeah, right. And then I'll come back to them in the next counseling session, having studied some things about the rocks. And I say, hey, I found about this. What can you tell me more about this? And did I understand it right? And they engage you about it. So that's my suggestion. And yeah.
Okay. So I have another from Eileen Alpahora. My son is overshy and almost hyperventilates every time he goes to school. Eventually, he gained friends and is now confident, happy going to school. But the school isn't giving him what he needs as a gifted child. So I had him transferred to SJCQC, then in Headway. But I noticed his social skills regressed. I was hoping to have a group therapy session with this ABA therapist, but the group age of the children in the center is too young. How do I address this? Would you recommend better options?
Okay. The regression is pretty common because of the online format. So I think we have to sort of understand that also because it's very different. With the pandemic and everything, I think we lost touch of a lot of things. I hear a lot of kids. I hear a lot of reports of kids regressing. Um, Regressing means then you just have to bring him slowly back to socialization. What you did before, you can go back to that. Now, the difficulty now is that I online socialization is still not real socialization. It's still frustrating socialization for a lot of people, especially if your child is the one who there are childs who like the feel of seeing the person, of being able to interact with the real person and not the screen. Okay, so um, if we're on level one, if there's some level of comfort already, maybe arrange muna play groups or ways that you can sort of slowly introduce again socialization into your child's life. Again, within the safety and comfort that's acceptable to you. But I would suggest slowly getting to that. No rush, but at least in preparation also to when we become face to face again, so that your child doesn't feel the pressure. But maybe slowly moving to that. Also, if the ABA therapist you currently have has younger children in the group, then move to another one. That's my suggestion also. Find another one because find where your child can get the socialization that they need. But in the meantime, I would suggest play groups, slowly re introducing your child to that whole idea of socialization in within safe spaces and your comfort level.
Oh yeah, and to add up, Eileen, we will try to get in touch with you because I mean I think this is something that we've started providing here in school as part of the program. So yeah, and then with the help of Miss Mary, we can come up with a solid program for your son. So at least we can cover all the target skills that we need to work on. So yeah, we'll be in touch. Next, I have from Miss Kelly again. I have an obvious gifted son, left-brained, and a girl who is gifted, right-brained. So the boy is 6 and the girl is 5. Can you advise me how can I manage catering for both? I am alone. My husband is stuck in the UK, and so are we here in the Philippines. No nannies, no village. So yeah.
Okay. So if they are left brain, right brain, so you have the artistic and the rational. I always say that they're not quite different. They normally are complementary. You know how music and math go together. So I always say that create activities that mold those. And I think here in Headway, I think they try to do that in some of the subjects. If I remember the program for, it's been a while. But when the online thing happened, they sort of mix certain things like art and math. I remember something like that, or science. So you could do that. If there are activities, like for example, let's say, classic example, volcanoes. This is typical. So you talk about volcanoes and how they erupt, right? You're thinking about that, and that's so scientific. That's such an. And then you have the creative part, the creation of the volcano, the designing of the volcano, the designing of it. So that makes it. So look at the activities that you can mesh, because there are a lot. Like for example, even in science, there's so many ways to do it. Like for example, if you're talking about the plants, the photosynthesis, one person can design on how it's done, and the other creates the poster for it. And then you're mixing those things, and you're able to address both of their needs. Or for example, when it comes to literature, and it can be that the other structures how the stories are written, and then the other acts it up and creates a role play or something like that. So it can be a mix of those. So it just requires a little bit creativity. I know as you mentioned, there's no village to help you, but these are things like you can always translate something scientific or something very structured to something very creative, and vice versa, something creative. For example, if you're talking about painting, there's a science to painting. There are layers. Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do it this way? Mixing colors. Why is the reason there's a mixing of colors? What makes colors? Is there such thing as colors? And you talk about the spectrum, the light spectrum. So it's all of those things. You just, asking the right questions for each topic to figure out how you can mix those. I mean, there's not a whole list of things that I can say given the time, but that's the idea. And I'm pretty sure there are some resources already that mix art, mix creativity with logic, and but those are my suggestions.
Next, I have Mishi. I hope we can have her complete name. Okay. Her question is, my daughter is 2 years old and she is good in memorizing. Sometimes she says things by herself. As early as now, she negotiates for things she likes. She is very vocal, expressive, and loves studying. Kids her age still don't do that. Should I be worried and have her checked?
Okay, so IQ tests are not given to 2-year-olds. Okay, so let me be clear about it. I think the youngest is three to four, but there are checklists. Headway has a checklist for giftedness. So you might want to just ask after this talk, let them know, a checklist, and then you can check, because we have what we call, when we do gifted assessments for younger kids, you have election by the parent, which means the parents does a checklist and elects and see the signs. And then you have the teacher who also observes and see the signs. And then eventually, when the child is ready for testing, we do the testing. So it is possible. So that's the initial assessment. So you might want to request for an initial assessment. We also have a Ravens progressive test, which is a general intelligence test that they give. It's also something that you can give to a child as early as 2, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So you might want to just ask for that, a checklist and a simple test, but not yet an IQ test. The IQ test is a 3.5. Okay, because it's long. The IQ test is long. So sometimes 2-year-olds can sit through the test. So yeah, please do have assess. If you see, there's nothing to lose. If you see your child to have some signs of giftedness, it's unusual. And if people are already telling your child there's something unusual about your child, have it tested. There are initial checklists that we can use. If you need, obviously, IQ tests you have to pay for and all of that. But there are initial checklists that you can use to check if you can move forward into an IQ test. So make use of it.
So Mishi, with that, what Miss Mary said about the checklist, the gifted scale, contact us. We'll provide it to you so that at least we can start having that early assessment, and you can contact us at this number. Yeah, that one. Okay, our next question. Wow, we're getting a lot. Miss Mary, you are a blockbuster. From Irma Pascual. My son doesn't want to go back to school. He is okay with modules. Hindi siya nagpapaturo sa amin. That's it. Kaya niya. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So one is, has he been assessed for giftedness? Because I don't know. You have to let me know if your child has been assessed for giftedness, because then if he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to. You just make sure that the socialization is there. So you have to always complement that, because ang tendency, there are some gifted kids, ang gusto na lang nasa libro na lang lagi. If they're asynchronously developed, you want to develop their social skills. You still want it. You don't want to push for it. You don't want to force them into it, but create opportunities for socialization. And if he can do it on his own, why not? If he can learn on his own. But I do suggest, if he hasn't been assessed, again, checklist. It's the easiest thing. Get a checklist and check, because if your child is gifted, they will have different needs as they progress, and it's important to address it. A lot of gifted children, I don't want to say wasted, but I'm losing the vocabulary, but are wasted because they are not, those needs are not addressed. And I've seen them. I've seen underachieving gifted children because their giftedness was not identified and taken care of or addressed.
So yeah.
Okay, I think
I have another one from Steph. I wish we can have their full name. Anyway, yeah, you can contact us at these numbers. Steph, my son loves to move around, and there are times when my son would walk around while thinking or solving. Do I stop my son from doing it? Some of his friends see it as different. He loves math, and sometimes he walks around to solve something.
Okay. No, I will not ask you to stop. Okay, so let me just put this out there. I do not believe in preventing your children from being themselves. I do not believe in that. Some parents might think it's the right thing to do to fit into the environment. Remember, we're not talking about socialization. We're not talking about conformity. We're talking about social development. You don't have to be liked by the whole world, but if they have a few friends, we're good. But your child might be a kinesthetic learner as well. They might be remembering stuff better if they are moving. Math to them might be easier when they're moving. I do that sometimes. When I'm trying to memorize something, it's better for me to walk around and to move and I talk by myself. But I do not, you do that. So maybe just, if you ask your child, are you bothered that your friends, I think, or your classmates think you're different? That's more important. How does your child feel about being seen as different? Because that is more important. If they feel that they're okay, they know that they're different and that's fine, then we have no problem. My number one concern will always be social emotional development of gifted children, because if they are hurt inside internally, they have anxieties and fears that we do not address, then that becomes problematic. But if he's not bothered by it, then maybe that's his way of learning, because some people learn that way. Some people talk to themselves to be able to better understand. And there sometimes it also helps in the pacing of the mind. If the mind is too fast, and I will say this in personal experience, if the mind is too fast, sometimes by walking, it slows it down so that you can process it easier. So might be. Again, if your child is not assessed though, I would still suggest some form of level of assessment. Again, signs of giftedness must be assessed because we don't know if they're gifted completely, if they're twice exceptional, if they're asynchronous development, and we have to assess those things so that we can better address them. So I'm just really now giving you general advice, or my thoughts on what you're presenting. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's I agree with that, Ms. Mary. Okay, next I have from Kay. Besides IQ tests, so again, I think this will go back to the assessment and the testing. Besides IQ tests, are there other ways to determine if a child is gifted? Like reasoning, some kids might not be able to keep still during the entire test. And also, there are bright kids who don't have resources like education, books. It's just the way they see life is different.
Okay. So again, as I mentioned, there are checklists. The IQ test is not the first test that we take. It's not the only test that measures giftedness. The checklist that I've been mentioning is actually a checklist, if I'm not mistaken, designed also by Dr. Linda Silverman, who's one of the prominent um, researchers and the mentor of Mamlus in giftedness. So what this does is that it tells you like what are the behaviors that you have to see, and it's multidimensional. It's not just intelligence that they're looking at, because IQ tests also measure reasoning. That's it. Also, for example, if the schools have achievement tests that they give, because some schools have that, even public schools, I think they have achievement tests. You will also indicate the age of your child in terms of their achievement test results. That can also be an indication for nomination for giftedness. Okay, but the checklists are not paid. It is only the IQ tests that are paid. So if I suggest again, after this, request for the checklist, because it's a very, very useful checklist. Yes. And we're not saying that IQ test equals giftedness. Please do not. The IQ test confirms the giftedness in a numerical sense, but the checklist tells us the different facets of the giftedness that your child might manifest. So yes, there are other things besides the IQ test.
Yeah, totally agree. And I mean, it's a combination of the information coming from the parents, the interview, and things like that. So to make it conclusive, it's we just have to put them all together just to see the clear picture. So again, I think, Ms. Mary, we're gonna have a lot of requests from these parents, regarding the checklist and this scale. So yeah, we'll be ready to send it to you guys. Drop us a call or send us a message. Okay. We have another one. Okay, this is from Ruth Aloba. An additional one. Thank you for your response earlier, Ms. Mary. What advice can you give to my daughter, who is very much aware that she is prone to sudden outbursts of anger when she's triggered and feels like that they have anger management issues?
Your child, how old was your child? I think she's below 10 years old. Okay. Okay, so I would say ask her first what triggers her. Find out the triggers. Follow therapy. In therapy, that's what we do. Find out her triggers and then ask her why she feels that way. She probably is feeling that because there's a frustration there that she cannot address. Anger is a symptom. It's not the problem. My first OJT with Ma'am Lu, sabi ko nga, saya traumatized ang first OJT ko sa kanya. Kasi OJT ko, 10 gifted children na may anger issues. Sunod-sunod. Sunod-sunod. So sa akin, the anger is just a manifestation because they lack the language to express it. So one is maybe see what the trigger is. If she has difficulty expressing it, think about, talk about anger, different words for anger, what can make people angry. Expose her to books about anger. There is a lot about anger for children, about talking about their feelings, emotional, social emotional to. Social emotional language, being able to express the source of anger. People think they have anger management issues. Anger management issues is different. They might have an unexpressed problem. That is their only language right now and capacity is to express it in anger. So what is that root? That's what you want to know. I suggest counseling, but if that's not possible, if counseling is not a possibility for you, look at books that are talking about anger. There are picture books that are about anger. Please go to gatherbooks.org. There is a list there about anger. I like using books for kids because it's, I also have this thing, also teach social emotional learning. I sometimes do this with kids. I have a fishbowl of emotions. Okay. And then it's not anger necessarily. They pick an emotion and they name it, they define it, and then I ask them, how do you experience that? Tell me when was the last time you were happy? What makes you happy? How do you express happiness? And then that way they start to learn how to express situations that match the emotion. So you might want to do that with your kid. Don't start with anger per se, but start with other emotions or whatever emotion they pick up. And always the question is define it. How do they express it? And give an example when they experience that. That increases their social emotional intelligence. And that might allow your child to process the anger, the feeling of anger. There.
Okay, so I'm going to read. We have the last 6 questions, guys. Okay, just to utilize the time. But again, Miss Mary, you're doing really well. Okay, I have an additional from Julie Pearl. What is the best approach for highly kinesthetic gifted kid? My son is into everything prehistoric, but it is so difficult to find activity related to prehistory.
If you have a garden and if you can buy dinosaur bones art, put it under the ground, mix it around, and excavation site. Like things that has to do with prehistoric times, just put excavation sites. Or sometimes you even like, for example, creating fake fossils and things like that. But if you just, garden and bones and like, things like the prehistoric period related, just put that and create this like layer. Like it could be a pot, like a rectangular pot and then just fill that up and then they can do excavation. Make it muddy, wet it and all of that so that they get to experience it. Or if you don't have a pot, put it in your actual garden and just dig it there. And that would be a good, kinesthetic activity for your child. And then as they unearth, they start completing the bones of the dinosaur, let's say, and then they identify which dinosaur it is and then do the research for that. And that might help.
Yeah, that's a nice one. Dinosaurs, I like it. Okay, additional from Kelly Bailey. Can you please send the link where to find the books you have showed earlier,
Sure.
Mary?
Sure.
That will be very helpful. Thank you. Okay. We have an appreciation message from Liv. Thank you so much, Ms. Mary and HSG for this webinar. We learned a lot. We appreciate it very much. I have a child in high school, and this webinar is really a big help. Thanks again. You're welcome, Liv. Okay. I had another question from Adrian Rivera. My kid enjoys watching animal documentaries, but I notice that he tends to fixate on those that he's already watched. So he tends to watch the same things over and over again. Is this okay?
Okay, so how old is your child? That's very important. Number 2, there is a possibility. How fixated? When you say fixate, as in like every day, every time. These are possible signs of ASD. So your child might be gifted and twice exceptional. So you might want to have that assessed. Okay, but I always approach things with precaution. But working with these kinds of kids for the longest time, I have red flags. So, for example, how fixated is it to the point that they throw a tantrum if they don't get to watch it? If you change it, double check. If that's the case, there might be signs. It might be nothing. It might not be. It might be nothing. But it's good to approach this with caution and just be sure of it. Um, Again, yeah, probably twice exceptional. I have a feeling it's twice exceptional. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I think I've seen that um, documentaries that he's been
Mhm.
watching. Okay, so I have from Medel. Hi, Camille Medel here. Hello, Camille. My 7-year-old musically gifted daughter loves her once a week piano lessons and her piano teacher, but easily gets frustrated when she practices on her own. We told her that we can stop her lessons if she is not happy anymore, but she doesn't want to. She is very happy during lessons and immediately after, but not in the days in between for most days. We are not strict anymore with the required daily practices to lessen the pressure, but doesn't seem to help. How do you find the balance between the two to help her?
Okay. So if she's gifted, therefore she hates practice. The gifted, they know how to do it. They really hate the practice really hurts. And maybe the socialization and the reward, there might be reward in being with the teacher because there's actually like very good. You're really good at that. All of that praise that you get, that could be a reason why she enjoys the lesson. And it's not because she hates piano, nor is it because she hates the practice itself, but the practice because she thinks unnecessary. It's unnecessary because as far as she's concerned, she already knows how to play it. Why does she have to practice it? That's always the mindset. So I would suggest is for her to create, maybe create a device of some sort of like a reward system for her. It doesn't have, she doesn't have to practice it like let's say every day or whatever. She plans out how much practice she has. Maybe ask the teacher to also explain why practice is important and what value of practice is and how it could make her better as a pianist. But also maybe create rewards. Rewards don't have to be financial. They don't have to be, for example, after you hear her play a piece, you say you give her a round warm of applause, or maybe she can reward herself. Like after 20 minutes of practice, she can do something else, and that might help her ease it. Or tell her which areas are you not good at yet, and maybe discuss that with the piano teacher. Tell her exactly areas she needs to practice, so she doesn't have to practice for a long time. The gifted really hate practical rehearse. That's why I say routine is important, structure is important because um, they resist it. So I would suggest just allowing her to plan her practice and then keeping to that. And if she keeps up, like for example, she plans to practice 3 times a week. If she keeps to that, then you might have like her favorite food or something like that, just so that it comforts her and know that she's working towards something. Not every day until she gains the liking for it. She associates it as a positive experience as opposed to a negative experience. Sir Mark, you're muted.
How did I miss that? Thank you. Okay. Another one from Julie Pearl. Does socialization have to be in the child's area of interest, or can it be simply playing outdoors, doing free play with the neighbors?
It could be definitely free play. Again, it's always a combination. I said this. They're still children. They still love to play. They still love to run around, but it has to be balanced because they need intellectual stimulation as much as they need their age mates playing with their age mates. So just balance it out. It doesn't have to be always their interest. I mean, by interest, you mean like the things that they love in terms of study and all of that. Of course, they're still interested in playing. So yeah, it's okay.
Okay, we have another appreciation message from Kate Gilera. Thank you, Ms. Mary and HSC team for this webinar. This is very helpful and insightful in understanding giftedness. God bless. God bless you too, Kate. So we've posted here in the chat box the link of the books that Ms. Mary mentioned earlier. So feel free to copy that link. So you can have it accessed. I mean, if you have to purchase it or download or whatever, however you'll be able to get those books. And again, going back to what Ms. Mary has been trying to tell earlier to everyone, it all goes back to having a proper assessment. Like could be with the checklist in the beginning, could be a formal assessment, a sit down, paper and pencil assessment. So there are different types of assessment depending on what your child should be assessed for. So again, it all goes back to that, so that at least we can help your kids better. I think that's the most way for us to better understand, and to better give out the recommendation and suggestion appropriately, is if your child has been properly assessed. So having said, here at the Headway School for Giftedness, this is one of the many services that we provide. We provide assessments. We provide social skills programs. So we have the group social skills training that's being run on regular days. So feel free to contact us. Feel free to ask questions, send messages. We will be willing and happy to assist you in any way that you can. One more time, thank you, parents, for joining this webinar. Ms. Mary, you've done really, really well. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we wish to see you more. Yeah. And anyway, so if there are no more questions, we'd like to end this presentation. So before we end, our tech support would request for us. Can we open our camera a little bit and take a photo? We want to see everybody too. Okay, there you go. We can see the beautiful faces now. Hello. Why did we not see this earlier? Okay, so there are a couple more.
Nance.
HSC Tech. Your camera's not open. Okay. Oh, we've got teachers. Our teachers here from Headway. Hello there. Okay. On my mark. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. All right. Perfect. Well done, guys. One more. One more down. Okay. Mom Luz, we want to say hi to Mom Luz. Mom Luz, hello there. Okay. Okay.
Hello,
Let's make sure.
everyone. Welcome, Ma'am Nancy from Department of Education and Parents.
Okay. Last one. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. And we're happy to see that there are kids in here. Hello there. Hi. So, okay. Thank you once again. Thank you very much, guys. We hope to see you again. We'll be posting more of the activities, more of these webinars in our Facebook group, and we're gonna send you invites. So please join us, spread the word, share it to your friends, to other families as well, to other parents that you think will be able to relate in the topics that we're gonna be having. Okay. So have a nice weekend.
Bye.
We'll see you soon. Thank you, Miss Mary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ma'am Mary. Thank you, Ma'am Luz.
Thank you, Ma'am Mary. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.